This plastic greenhouse survived Storm Isha, but this one fell apart. Both of these greenhouses had been up since March last year. However, some key differences meant that one stayed weatherproof while the other one was taken down by wind during the night. This time last year I made a video reviewing these plastic greenhouses and it sparked hundreds of comments about their pros and their cons, but it also provided some great advice that you can use to secure your greenhouse. In this video, I'm going to re-secure my plastic greenhouse using your top tips, and I'm going to show you what I found stops this from happening and will make sure that your plastic greenhouse stays standing strong all year round. First of all, let me quickly show you how the greenhouse is put together. It's entirely made of metal poles and held together by these small plastic connectors. That gets you the outer frame, as well as these 12 shelf sections along the side and 2 more at the back. And when it's fully built, you add this plastic cover over the top and tie it to the connectors in the corners, as well as to the poles by the door. But the fit for everything is fairly loose and it's held together by a small amount of friction. So if you lean on the frame too hard, then there's a fairly good chance that one of the poles will pop out. A lot of people had this exact complaint, but 2 of you left comments to say that you glued the poles in place, with one suggestion saying you should use plumber's glue on the inside of the connectors during the build, and they said that made the frame really solid. And to me, that seems a fairly weatherproof way of making sure that the outer structure doesn't fall apart. But I only rent this house, so I know I'm going to need to disassemble this sometime soon, which means I can't be doing anything that permanent. However, I do have a lot of these bungee cords lying around from last year's tomatoes, so I should be able to physically hold the frame together. When the greenhouse fell apart in the storm, it was the roof section and the top of the shelves that were pulled off by the plastic cover. So I'm going to add a bungee from the top down to the shelves, and then add another bungee across the shelves and down to the bottom. And you should buy some cable ties to secure the racks. When the storm came, it didn't disturb the bottom half of the frame. That's because I secured the base using these garden staples. For each of the metal bars that touch the ground, I used 2 garden pegs, 1 at each end, and I used a mallet to hammer it tight into the ground. So I have no concerns about the base going anywhere, especially as the other greenhouse hasn't moved in 2 years now. However, some of you went even further in order to secure your frame in place. Ash and Ham Fox mounted the frame on wood and used pipe clips to secure the frame in place. One of you suggested using ground anchors, I think into concrete, and then strapping the whole frame down to the ground. But most of you ended up using bags of compost, gravel, concrete slabs, bricks and breeze blocks, and placing them on the base of the frame to try and weigh it down. The next failure point was a problem for pretty much everyone who commented, and it affects the entire product. The problem was the plastic cover itself, which can be easily damaged in several ways. It can be pierced relatively easily. This hole here was caused by a garden lamp rubbing against the inside of the cover in the wind. The zips often break. On the first one I bought, the teeth that are attached to the cover tore off and the door stopped closing properly. While on this latest one, the zip itself has split in half. No, I don't really understand how either. And the final problem, and perhaps the most significant issue, is that the fabric ties will slowly tear off if too much wind blows into the greenhouse, meaning that your cover will no longer attach to the frame. This wouldn't be too upsetting if you could buy replacement covers every couple of years. But sadly you can't, which means you either need to do a DIY repair, make your own cover, or buy a new greenhouse entirely and put the new cover on the old frame, which is exactly what I did last year. Don't build this in the wind, that was really stupid. However, I also built the new frame and decided to attach the old cover and to try and patch it up to keep the wind at bay. But it looks like I'm going to have to do that again this year too, and do a few extra things to make the cover even stronger. Holes formed in the cover where the fabric ties tore away from the frame, so I used duct tape on both sides of the hole to seal them. And it did a reasonable job, although be prepared to use a lot of duct tape, especially around the corners. And you might need to inspect the cover after a storm and replace any tape that comes away. I didn't do that, and I think that's how the wind got in and blew off the top half of this plastic greenhouse. I also managed to reattach the original zip to get the zip teeth back in place, and sealing up that corner of the door. It's not going to win any awards, but it gets the job done. Although Hamfox reckons that you can buy a new zip designed for adding to the plastic cover, which I think works a bit like this double-sided Velcro, and you just mount it to either side of the door. One thing I recommended last year, which you really must do, is replace the ground pegs and guy ropes that come with the greenhouse. They're rubbish for securing into the ground, which means your plastic cover hasn't got any support, your fabric ties will get damaged, and that's how your plastic cover blows away in the wind. By using high quality guy ropes and the ground pegs I showed you earlier, they'll stay in the ground for much longer, even in high winds, and that means your plastic cover will last a lot longer. To keep the cover in place and stop it flapping in the wind, a lot of people will take this overhang and on the outside weigh it down with bricks, compost, or even bury it underground. However, I find that if you wrap it under the frame and use more duct tape to stick it to the inside, then with the frame pressing down on the cover, the wind struggles to get underneath. Of course, the simplest solution might just be to take the plastic cover off during the winter. However, my shed leaks, which means I use this as my dry storage. However, many of you take yours off, and that act alone seems to give you several years of life out of your plastic greenhouses. So if you're only going to do one thing to prolong the life of your plastic greenhouse, then it should probably be taking off the plastic cover during the windy season. And conveniently, that also happens to be the easiest and cheapest task on my list. This next tip is all about where you position your greenhouse. This small detail can have an enormous impact on the forces that the wind will bring down on your greenhouse and ultimately how long it will last. And as you can probably hear, I've saved filming this until a windier day. Today it's blowing in just south of southwest over that way, but the prevailing wind is normally from the southwest over there. Let me show you. What happens is the wind comes over the hill or along the bottom of the valley, and then it gathers just over that hedge and accelerates as it comes up the hill towards the house, making the ground basically a giant aircraft wing. And because of the shape of the landscape, the winds in this garden are incredibly strong, and it all comes straight for the greenhouses. This one is side on to the wind, so takes the brunt of the force and will sometimes even rock from side to side. But because we've sealed the flaps under the bottom of the frame and will weigh down the structure with a lot of plants and soil, the wind can't really get in as long as the hole stays sealed and that door stays shut. Weighing the flaps down and using good guy ropes really does help, but if you leave the door open even a little bit. In terms of position, the best way of placing your greenhouse is so the smallest side without the door or one of the corners is facing the prevailing wind. That way the winds can gently deflect around the edge of the structure without imparting much force on the greenhouse. However, making use of any shelter that's available is also a really good idea. Many of you use spots next to your house or by a fence or under natural shelters like a tree. And while greenhouses can survive out in the open, mine just about do, reducing how much wind is going to strike your greenhouse will always be a good strategy. Using shelter also has the added advantage of reducing how hot it gets in here. Greenhouses with only one door don't get much airflow, so temperatures in here can hit the high 30s pretty regularly, maybe even reach the 40s in the summer. I put my greenhouses under the tree to try and reduce the impact of the sun in the evening when it's warmest, but covering the top of your greenhouse with a sheet or a towel can also help. And some of you go one step further and very boldly cut into the back of your greenhouse to create a second door, increase airflow through the structure and bring down those temperatures. Even if you only do some of those things, your plastic greenhouse will stand strong throughout the seasons. This one here is the frame from 2022 wearing the cover from 2023. And the only damage is here where I had something rubbing against the cover. In my original review, I was a little bit harsh on this greenhouse, but it's done me solid, and many of you reckon it will last for several years. So for £80, I think this is a great buy. And many of you wholeheartedly agreed, with some reckoning that it makes a great starter greenhouse despite the issues. Of course, the best thing about plastic greenhouses is all the extra growing space they give you, liberating up your kitchen counters from all the seedlings you'll be sowing. For seeds you can start this month, check out this video here, which I'll update as the year progresses so you can get growing all year long. So I'll see you up there, and as always, happy gardening.